Joining me now, former CEO of Hewlett Packard, Fiorina, who ran for president last year. Carly, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks. Good to be with you, Chris.
Let's start with Roy Moore and the president's evolving position on the allegations against the judge. Here they are.
The president said in his statement earlier this week that if the allegations are true, then that Roy Moore should step aside.
The incontrovertible principle is that there's no Senate seat that's worth more than a child.
I can tell you one thing for sure. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat.
What do you make of the president now siding with Moore because, one, he says the judge denies the allegations, and two, because he says the judge has an opponent who's a liberal?
Well, that's politics, isn't it, Chris? This is all about politics, and that's why when politicians talk about this, it doesn't have a lot of credibility. This has been going on in politics for a very long time. Democrats try and defend their own. Republicans try and defend their own. It's a little bit like George Washington warned us 200 years ago. The problem with politics and political parties is they will care about winning above all else. Donald Trump cares about a vote in the Senate, no more, no less.
And what do you think should happen to Moore? And what do you think should happen to the Democrats? Because as Mike Emanuel pointed out in his piece, we've got two senior Democrats now, Senator Franken and Congressman Conyers, who are also facing their own allegations. What do you think should happen to these people?
Well, first of all, this behavior goes on all the time. It has for a long time, unfortunately, in politics, in the workplace, in athletics. And when we politicize it, it's not my team versus your team. Republicans and Democrats alike are guilty of it. I'll tell you, the most helpful thing would be for Congress to change its own processes and procedures. If someone wants to come forward and allege harassment or abuse in Congress, they must go through a mandatory 30 days of counseling, mandatory mediation led by a lawyer whose express purpose is to protect the institution, and then maybe, if they're lucky, they get a secret settlement paid for by taxpayers from the Treasury. That whole process is designed to protect politicians, Democrats and Republicans alike, to protect the institution and to make it next to impossible for a woman, or in some cases, a young boy page, to come forward. That ought to change. That would actually help.
What do you think, though, about these politicians? Do you think if there's an allegation against somebody, now in some of these cases, Franken has acknowledged them, some of the others have denied them, including Judge Moore and Congressman Conyers, do you think that should just be it? Their career should be over?
Well, you know, I think in virtually all of these cases, there has been corroboration of the women's stories. In virtually every case, it's not one woman who comes forward. It's 3, 4, 5, 6. And I think what we all need to think about, but frankly, particularly men need to think about, is in virtually all these cases, people knew. People knew this was going on. You can't tell me that no one knew what was going on with Roy Moore or John Conyers or Al Franken or Charlie Rose or Roger Ailes or Howard Weinstein. People knew. Men knew and women knew. And so while we all express outrage now and people say, should they step down or should they not, I think the question going forward is, when are we going to stop tolerating this behavior and respecting the men who do it? Because all these men have been respected, despite the fact that people knew.
I want to pick up on that because you made a comment this week that may surprise people. I want to put it up on the screen. You said it will only be a watershed moment if men decide to step forward. You weren't talking about the men who commit the harassment. You were talking about the buddies, the other people in the office. Why are they the key?
Well, you see, women continue to step forward. Women continue to fight this. You know, we're all shocked, for example, by the scandal of the doctor who was abusing young gymnasts. But 25 years ago, there was a scandal about a coach abusing young swimmers, and it all sort of disappeared, and he went on to become famous. In other words, we go through these waves because it's gone on for a long time. Men, not most, but enough, abuse their positions of power in return for sex. And what happens is women step up, but men continue, unfortunately, in too many instances, to respect the men who are behaving this way. every single one of the men who's been exposed in the last several weeks was respected. And so I think men need to decide, I'm not going to respect a man who disrespects women. I'm going to withhold my respect from him unless he respects others. That will be a watershed moment.
I want to turn to your story because you wrote a troubling essay this week, and I should point out that we have a link to the essay on our webpage, foxnewssunday.com. You tell your story, starting almost 40 years ago as a secretary, working your way up the corporate ladder. Were you a victim of sexual harassment? What was your personal experience?
Of course I was. Every woman I know was. I don't mean I've been raped or assaulted in some of the ways these women have, but was I groped by a friend of my family's? Of course. Was I propositioned? Of course. Was I introduced as a bimbo? Of course. Did I have, on occasion, men banging on my hotel room door and then lying about it the next morning? Of course. This is common occurrence, unfortunately, and that is my point. My point is not that most men are bad. Most men are good and respectful, and many, many men have helped many women, myself included. And all women are not victims. But the perennial abuse of power by men over women has been with us for a long time, and everyone knows it. Women know it, and men know it.
As you were working your way up the corporate ladder, you talked before about men using their power to try to, in exchange for sex. Was that something that was done with you, where men were in effect saying, you can do better, you can move faster professionally if you
Absolutely.
play ball?
I can remember having an argument with one of my bosses. I had a very attractive female colleague, and he told her that she should do whatever was necessary to get the sale. She confessed this to me. And I went and confronted this boss. Not every woman feels she can confront a man, but I have most often confronted men. And I said, you cannot give your subordinate this career advice. It is unacceptable. He was shocked. He was shocked.
Well, I want to ask you about that because most people think of you, and as you present yourself here now and during the campaign and head of Hewlett Packard, strong woman, take care of yourself. But we're talking about at an earlier stage when you were a more vulnerable woman. Did these moments threaten you, shake you? I mean, what was the emotional impact on you?
Well, I will tell you one story. I remember sitting at a dinner with a set of colleagues. We were talking about a very large contract, FTS 2000, right here in Washington, D.C. And all of my colleagues were men. That was frequently the case. And I remember one particular man saying to me, well, you know, when we get to, they were an examination of contractors, he said, when it comes time for us to present our credentials, we better hope you're not having your period. You won't be able to present. Wow. And I remember getting up and walking into the parking lot and crying in rage. I felt humiliated and embarrassed. And I came back to the table and didn't say another word for the rest of the night. But that night I went home and I thought, no one is ever going to make me feel like that again. So yes, women go through all of these emotions. And unfortunately, many of the women who have come forward recently didn't feel they were in a position to confront because the man had power over them, the power of their career, the power of their future. These women, when you watch them come forward, they obviously feel humiliated. They're embarrassed. It's not easy. Women have been coming forward for decades. The point of my post was to say, it's men's turn now.
We've had these moments before that seem to grab the nation's attention. People talk about changing it. You think of Anita Hill confronting Clarence Thomas during his Supreme Court nomination, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, and people say, we got to stop this. And as you know, the outrage wears off, it doesn't stop, and the moment passes. Is this going to be any different?
Well, that was the point of my post. The only way it is going to be different, in my opinion, is if men change their opinion about these kinds of men. Women have known this is going on and deal with it. Men have known this is going on and unfortunately too often look the other way. Not all men, but too many men. And I think the problem is that men still can respect men despite this behavior. When men decide, you know what, I can't respect this behavior anymore, and power in and of itself is not what earns respect. What earns respect is behavior and leadership and decency and respect for others.
Finally, I want to ask you, I want to go back to President Trump because you had your own moment with him during the presidential campaign when he said this, look at that face, would anyone vote for that? Here's how you responded in the next debate, and I also want to play what President Trump said this week about the harassers being exposed. Here it is.
I think women all over this country heard very clearly what Mr. Trump said.
I think she's got a beautiful face, and I think she's a beautiful woman. I think it's very, very good for women, and I'm very happy a lot of these things are coming out, and I'm very happy it's being exposed.
Which one is the real Donald Trump?
Oh, you know, we could endlessly analyze Donald Trump. What I focus on always is someone's behavior. How do they behave? Are they leading or are they not leading?
And President Trump?
Well, I think leaders understand that how you do things is as important as what you do. Leaders understand that they need to build support. Leaders focus on solving problems. Leaders serve others.
And you seem to be saying you don't think this president meets that test.
Well, I don't think he has yet often enough. He won't be the first president to fail the test of leadership, and he won't be the last, unfortunately. Politics is too rarely about leadership. Politics is too rarely about problem solving. Politics is too rarely about serving others. Politics is too often about my team versus your team. It's become like sports, and we all know how emotional and irrational sports is.
Carly, thank you. Thanks for coming in on this holiday weekend, and it's always good to talk with you.
Thanks.
Joining me now, former CEO of Hewlett Packard, Carly Fiorina, who ran for president last year. Carly, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks. Good to be with you, Chris.
Let's start with Roy Moore and the president's evolving position on the allegations against the judge. Here they are.
The president said in his statement earlier this week that
warned us 200 years ago, the problem with politics and political parties is they will care about winning above all else. Donald Trump cares about a vote in the Senate, no more, no less.
And what do you think should happen to Moore? And what do you think should happen to the Democrats? Because as Mike Emanuel pointed out in his piece, we've got two senior Democrats now.
If the allegations are true, then that Roy Moore should step aside.
The incontrovertible principle is that there's no Senate seat that's worth more than a child.
I can tell you one thing for sure. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat.
What do you make of the president now siding with Moore because, one, he says the judge denies the allegation, Senator Franken and Congressman Conyers, who are also facing their own allegations. What do you think should happen to these people?
Well, first of all, this behavior goes on all the time. It has for a long time, unfortunately, in politics, in the workplace, in athletics. And when we politicize it, it's not my team versus your team. Republicans and Democrats alike are guilty.
And two, because he says the judge has an opponent who's a liberal.
Well, that's politics, isn't it, Chris? This is all about politics, and that's why when politicians talk about this, it doesn't have a lot of credibility. This has been going on in politics for a very long time. Democrats try and defend their own. Republicans try and defend their own. It's a little bit like George Washington.